Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum. Today I'm gonna go through just a short discussion on how Islam and Muslims have a lot to offer to society, in your local community, nationally and internationally, in light of events and statements by organizations and individuals recently. I won't go into the politics, but of course it affects us. So to refute such false claims made with malice is in many cases followed upon us, and I will try to do so, but we will not be going into necessarily the politics or individuals to make it a general statement. I will go through a few things, mentioning some verses of the Quran, Hadith, and stopping to elaborate, and then summarizing. Particularly as we're in the month of Ramadan, and we know it's a time for worship, to maximize our reward, and we know our rewards are maximized anyway, they're multiplied in this month, but we strive to do even more. And this time is not only a time for worship, but it's time for coming together as a community in many different ways. And I use the word community and not specifically Muslims in this case to show Muslims and Islam is about being good to people, to whoever they are, wherever possible. And as I mentioned, in light of recent events and statements by people, including politicians, I will look to show you how many of their statements are false or they're made in ways which are not true to their actual context. The Quran emphasizes community service through acts of righteousness, charity, and social solidarity with a strong focus and emphasis on supporting the vulnerable, such as orphans and neighbors. Many verses highlight mutual help in piety and serving the community as a duty of the best people and focusing on unity and brotherhood. The Quran explains about mutual support in goodness in Surah Ma'idah. Help one another in righteousness and piety, and do not help one another in sin and aggression. In Surah Baqarah, verse 177, true righteousness involves spending wealth out of love for Allah on keen orphans, the needy, the wayfarer, and those who ask. Surah An-Nisa, verse 36, tell believers to worship Allah and show kindness to parents, kindred, orphans, the needy, neighbors, near and far, companions, and wayfarers. Just a couple more verses. Surah Al-Imran, verse 110. You are the best people ever raised for the good of mankind because you have been raised to serve others. Surah Hujurat, verse 10. The believers are brothers, so make peace between your brothers. And lastly, Surah Baqarah, verse 273, highlights helping those who are shy to ask for help despite their need. And firstly, you can understand the verses, but I left it completely in English, so you are able to understand, and there's no jargon or anything needs to be interpreted as such. And you can see the Muslims are told to help one another, and that's expected. You're going to help them because they're your fellow Muslim. But then we're also told to help others that are not necessarily Muslims, and I would expand on in a few minutes. And from just these few, there's loads more that can be said, and I prepared this to be brief. We can see Muslims by default, they're people of service to others, helping others, and in fact, it is part of worship and gaining a reward in helping others. In fact, when we give charity, whether it's to Muslims or non-Muslims, it's a reward and it's worship. And to those who say Muslims only help their own people, only Muslims, then how can it be charity and an act of worship which you are rewarded for if you are helping, giving charity, whether it's money, food, actually going and helping with your body to non-Muslims, and you're getting reward for it. So people who would like to say we only help our own, they are mistaken and perhaps knowingly or unknowingly. One of the things that maybe some people will be aware of, because it's quite evident and you can see it whether it's on the street, in your local food bank, during iftar time, when the mosques and the community centers are full and people are able to have food, whether they are Muslims or not. No questions asked, no money or anything like that. And we are told feeding the poor is strongly emphasized as a duty with consequences for ignoring it, and that's mentioned in various different chapters and hadith, and I will go into a hadith later on. But from people's actions, you can see, and even something that comes to mind, and I don't have the source with me, but I've spoken about it myself in a video and on TikTok, where there was a Muslim man who was open for Christmas Day, and we know most businesses are closed on Christmas Day. Mostly, I'd say, people who aren't Christians, they might have their business open, and even then many of them like to take as a day off. There's a Muslim man in Liverpool who kept his fish and chip shop open and was giving food for free to the needy, the poor, and I believe to NHS workers and people like that who have to work on Christmas Day. And we can see that's a positive action and the comments are still there if you'd like to look. A lot of the comments that I got is one of my highest viewed posts and videos. Unfortunately, the comments are negative because they have to often find a negative from a positive situation, perhaps because they can't fathom that Muslims are good people, that do good things because they want to, not because they're going to necessarily gain anything from it. The ultimate gain and reward is from Allah. And the people who are saying certain things that he is doing it for publicity or to get more customers or things like this, where in fact he himself, not only is he did it last year in 2025, he was doing it previously, and he didn't go to the newspapers that picked it up themselves. And you can see, of course, people are saying we don't celebrate Christmas, so it's just a normal day for us in terms of working. So he's just doing that, but he could have just had a normal day of working and charged people to eat, but he chose to serve for free. And it wasn't part of the script, if you like, but that came to my head. Kindness to neighbors, we are told in the Quran along with hadith that emphasize caring for neighbors, and I will expand on that in a couple of minutes. Eliminating injustice. Believers are commanded to uphold justice even against their own interests. I believe that's in Surah Al-Imran. And what I always say is, many people, they like to say, when Muslims, particularly in my experience dealing with different people, they're only outraged or they want justice when it's something wrong done to a Muslim and not necessarily if it's done to anybody else. When we are told, and what I just read, to uphold justice even against their own selves, and I can't recall if it's specifically a hadith or not, but we are told even against your own parents or your siblings, or if there's justice to be had, then you need to implement it regardless of even if it's against yourself. And we have examples of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, who we saw the incident where he was the Amir al-Mu'minin, the Khalifa. And in today's age, if you have a leader, they would say, why are you talking to me? Who am I and who are you? But we know from the incident that people questioned him regarding, I believe, an extra piece of clothing that he had, and that was from the Bayt al-Mal. And people questioned him from where he was, and he explained to them, and then people realized that he's not taking his position for granted and just taking whatever he wants to. He was, in fact, being just and more just than people even realized. And recently we also saw that in the community there was certain, I'm not going to mention exactly what it is, but there was certain wrongdoings going on, and it was by so-called Muslims that were not acting upon Islam or what we're told to do. And Muslims were the one saying there needs to be a correct punishment and other things going on. And even then, they're like, oh, people are like, Muslims are bad, Muslims are this. But when the Muslims are the one saying that is wrong, you still want to say that Muslims are X, Y, and Z. So you can't win either way. And I'd say to Muslims generally, and even minorities generally, you trying to impress people more than you need to isn't necessary. And even when you do so, it's thrown back in your face, um, because there's still a lot of people will often find still things wrong, and they will never be satisfied with what you do. And I'm not going to go into the Quran verse because I don't think it's for this show. It's not necessarily wrong to say, but I just don't want to go into it. Where we are told that you can try your best to be accommodating and change for certain people, certain non-Muslims, but they will never be happy with you until you are like them. So, and we are seeing this. The Muslim and non-Muslims are not happy. Muslims are trying to be a certain way that is not in line with Islam, and they know it, and other people know it, and they're thinking maybe they will do X, Y, and Z, and they will increase in status or money or fame or whatever else, and then you realize that you do all of that to go against the principles, to go against God, and then you see those same people that you were trying to please, they're still not happy with you. So one message that I would say is do your best, do what you can for all of your community, not just Muslims, but don't necessarily do more than you need to. Of course, there's some cases where you will, and the reward is for you, with Allah, and you're not going to be necessarily rewarded in this life. But don't go over and beyond when many people, they will not be satisfied. You can give them, and there's stories of, you can give them a whole house, loads of gold, so many other things, and they will still not be happy, and they will still say X, Y, and Z, because ultimately it's not what you give them or what you do for them, it's how they have hatred within themselves for you or what you represent, and no amount of being good to them will ultimately change that. One thing I want to quickly add, things just come on top of my head. We know that justice is what God commands us to do and what He likes. And we've seen examples in the past, and the ulama say even today that if there is a non-Muslim group that is just, and there's Muslims who are not just, the just people will be the ones that will come to power and will run the affairs, because and I'm not saying word for word, but justice is over everything else. So you can be a Muslim, and if you're oppressing the people and doing X, Y, and Z, and there's a non-Muslim who is good to the people and is running things properly, then that would always take precedence. And we've seen this in the past, and unfortunately now we are seeing in many places, not all over the world, but in many places, you find the non-Muslims who are doing good things, and the Muslims are the ones that are supposed to be doing the good things and being just, and they are the opposite. And then they wonder why we are in the way that we are in and why they are not succeeding. The Prophet Muhammad emphasized that a person is not a true believer if they sleep with a full stomach while knowing their neighbor is hungry. And this is in Sahih Bukhari. And it says, he is not a believer whose stomach is filled with his neighbor while his neighbor goes hungry. Another narration states, he does not have faith in me who spends the night satiated while he knows that his neighbor to his side is hungry. The Prophet ﷺ advised, O Abu Dhar, when you cook a stew, put more water in the broth and take care of your neighbors. Before I go to the last part, in terms of this section, if you notice, it doesn't say to your Muslims or to your family or to your tribe or anything like that. It says to your neighbor. And we know there were non-Muslims living in Medina, and there are non-Muslims amongst us in the past. We've seen examples of, and we've seen non-Muslims now. And this teaching shows us that be good to your neighbor, and it doesn't specify if he's a Muslim or not, if he's this type of person or not, if he's good to you or not. just to your neighbor. And classically, many people, and maybe in the olden days, we're going back maybe 100, 200 more years, your neighbor wasn't just, let's say you live in a semi-detached house, the next house next to you. Your neighbor was considered perhaps the five houses, 10 houses, each either side of you, and that would be considered your neighbor, and everyone in the community would know each other and they would be aware. And with today's age, everyone's individual. But if you, let's say someone didn't turn up at the mosque and they usually turn up every day for, let's say, Maghrib, and they are not here, then they would ask about their whereabouts because they would care about each other and they know that this person is here, but he's not here today. Or the examples, or even the examples of the Prophet who inquired about a woman, and she had passed away, and the funeral had been done, and the Sahaba along the lines were saying that we had buried her, we did not want to disturb you, and the Prophet said, you should have told me about it. This woman, I believe she might have swept the masjid or helped him in some way, but you can see this woman, to many maybe it might have just been any woman, hence why they might not have told the Prophet, but to him it was someone that is worth knowing and going to the funeral for and other things. And today there's not any of that really. Maybe in Ramadan we see it where if you have Muslim neighbours, they might give iftar to you, you give iftar to them, but generally we don't really know our neighbours or act upon this. And okay, today there's most people, they have food, they have money, they're well enough. Then why not? They won't go hungry to sleep hungry or things like this. But it's not necessarily about in today's day and age if they're hungry or not. Because if we don't have hungry neighbors, we can give to other people. We can give to the needy. We can give to charities. We can give to the food bank, which I'll mention in a second with an example. But just speaking to your neighbor, checking in with them, and people like to say, "Oh," and this is something that come up on the top of my head, that we want to give da'wah, or we don't have time to learn 5 years, 10 years, go learn in an institute or to a teacher or read these books and whatever else, so we don't have time to do all of that, but we want to give da'wah. And someone even like myself, that for certain other reasons I haven't been able to study as much as I would have liked, but the amount that I've studied and I'm continuing to study, you don't necessarily have to study for 10 years and be an allama or a mufti or anything like that to give da'wah. Your da'wah is to your neighbours, the salam that you give them if they're Muslims, giving them greetings in terms of good morning, how are you, whatever else. Speaking to them, offering to them, if they're elderly, you might want to help them take the bins out or take their shopping in or whatever else. And if you're in the workplace, universities, even just out shopping in the taxis and whatever, the way you deal with them is how people see Muslims. And another thing that is on my paper, but we have seen Islam has become still the fastest growing religion in the world, and that's not even counting Muslims that are born. In terms of you're a Muslim, you have a son or a daughter, it's people who are converting to Islam. It's still the fastest growing religion in the world, despite what we are seeing around the world. And people would like to think, with a lot of the propaganda in the media and by politicians and other people, you would like to think, oh, why would anybody become Muslim seeing all of this? Why would anyone even think about it? But they see Muslims for who they are in real life, when they're at work, when they're shopping, in the taxi driver, restaurant workers and all these other people. And I think this is how Muslims are. They're nice to me. They're good people. They're normal people. They're trying to work. They're trying to earn a living for their family, pay off whatever the money that they might have left to pay and whatever else. And they realize nothing like what the media is. And those examples in the media and other people, they're extreme examples that even Muslims are saying that these are not acting upon Islam and we don't have anything to do with them. So if you want to give da'wah, you don't have to do all of these study for, like some people will need to study for that many 10 years, 5 years to be an imam, to be a mufti and all these other positions that we need. For your everyday person can give da'wah, and of course you're going to only give what you know. And if you don't know something, then say you don't know something. And like we know the great Imam Malik, he was asked a number of questions, and many of them he said no, and people were perplexed. You're supposed to be the Imam of Medina. If there's something, a fatwa to be issued, you issue it, nobody else issues it. And he didn't know. He said, tell the people, Malik doesn't know. He could have said, I'm Imam Malik, everybody knows me as the Imam of Medina. Um, why, let me say, oh, I'm going to find out, or Imam Malik wasn't at home, or whatever else. But he said he didn't know. So if we don't know something, we don't know something, but we can smile to people, we can ask them about their day, we can help them in ways we can. And this is how people are becoming Muslims. And even if they don't become Muslims, they'll have a positive impression of Islam. It's not necessarily that we want to make everybody Muslim. It's about, I mean, we have always lived amongst non-Muslims. If it was about making everybody Muslim, then take a look at India, for example. How many decades and decades and decades have Muslims been there and have had positions of leadership? And there's still a Muslim, Hindu majority country, and other countries. It's not necessarily to make everybody Muslim, but to see Muslims as they're good people. And if someone doesn't make a Muslim, no problem. If they just deal with their interaction with the Muslim is that these are good people and they're not my enemies and I don't hate them and I'm not going to go to these certain events because certain people tell me to, because I've seen Muslims for how they are, and that's enough. They're not becoming Muslims, but they're seeing Muslims in a positive light, and this is what we need. And another example which I just thought of, but all of these examples you can see for yourself, and I've made videos on them as well. Recently there was a individual, I believe in Stoke. He saw a woman at night in Stoke that was on the side of the road. Perhaps I think there was an argument with another taxi driver, so she couldn't go home, and he saw her on the road like this, so he thought there might be something wrong with happened to her. So he decided to drop her home, and there's nothing in this for him. He's not going to get any money or anything like that. He's going out of way to help that woman, and later on, she said that he had awed her, and you know what awed means, I'm not going to say it. And later on it turns out, and it's on the news as well, that she lied, and you can see he's going out of his way to do things to help people, and that's our nature, to help people. And sometimes things like this happen, and he was cleared because he had recorded it. But we can see, and like I mentioned previously, don't always go out of your way to do things when you don't need to. And because of incidents like this, perhaps there will be genuine people, women, at night time, maybe they've been genuinely harmed or whatever else, and men will just walk away. They're not going to help because of incidents like this. And why I thought I'd mention this is two things, like I just mentioned. Muslims doing the things, good things because they want to, not necessarily because they're going to get anything in return, because he didn't get anything in return anyway, and in fact he got things that are unacceptable in return. And at the same time he went over and beyond, and this is how he was treated. So we spoke about kindness to neighbours. Eliminating injustice. Believers are commanded to uphold justice even against their own interests. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized that a person is not a true believer if they sleep with a full stomach while knowing that the neighbour is hungry. This teaching, reported in Sahih al-Imam Bukhari, highlights that ensuring a neighbour's hunger is satisfied is a fundamental obligation of faith, not merely charity. One thing that I would like to say is these hadith or Quran verses or things that we hear from the scholars, often they're just things that we hear or we read or someone tells us, but they're not often brought to life. They're just left in the books, and people, oh yeah, we heard the hadith, oh it's a good hadith, we should act upon it, and then we go home from the mosque or we listen to the talk and we go home and that's it. And then we say Muslims should be doing more, we should be doing X, Y and Z, and then we just forget about it, and then we wonder why we're in situations that we are in. And one practical example that we can do is when you buy, and I'll speak about this in a second, when you buy food for your daily, weekly, monthly shopping, often there's supermarkets that have sections as well. You can, let's say you buy chickpeas, you buy a tin for yourself and you buy another extra tin and then you put it into the donation. There's a section in some supermarkets where they give it to food banks and stuff like this. Or you can even go to your local food bank and see what they take, whether it's dried food, tin food and whatever else they take. Buy one for yourself if you need it, or even if you don't need it, just buy it for them and give it to them. You don't have to do much. You're going to go for your weekly shop anyway. and this is how you are able to help other people. And this is another example of the food bank, and I'll highlight it later. You're not necessarily gonna. It's not. There's no. It's a Muslim food bank or it's a Pakistani food. It's just a food bank, and even Muslim food banks, which I'm going to speak about in a second, it's not. Oh, you're only Muslim, so we're going to help you. It's for anybody. So maybe your neighbor's fine, and maybe you're only going to give them iftar and whatever else, and you're not really you're both your neighbor and you're both fine with how you are. You don't necessarily have to give each other things. Maybe that's not how your relationship is. But you want to act upon something like this. Maybe you can give something to the food bank, or give something, or even go to your local church or synagogue or temple or whatever else. They have food banks as well. So we can show that, of course, we can't necessarily, if it's going to be offered for their worship purposes, we can't necessarily offer towards the food. For example, the longer in Sikh places of worship, which is a good initiative as well. And of course, I speak primarily about Muslims. To be honest, I speak about anything affecting minorities, as you will see in my videos and whatever else. But primarily on Muslims, because I'm a Muslim and my experience are shaped by that. I'll quickly touch on the longer. We can see even the Sikh community for a number of years here and elsewhere abroad, they have been doing good work, and they are feeding people for free, and they still get attacked. And unfortunately, the other day, someone perhaps thought that Sikh place of worship was a Muslim place of worship, because what did they do? And it's noted, and I just spoke about it yesterday, that an individual, and it was noted that it was a Polish individual, decided to put pork outside the Gurdwara, and he was later caught on camera and whatever else. But you can see people are targeted all the time. So I'm highlighting about Muslims, but as minority background people, help anyone and everyone. So whether it's a Sikh community, Hindu community, anybody else, help them. And we even see from them they are doing good things. And if we can help them in certain ways, we can help them. If they have a food bank, if it's to do with their worship, then unfortunately we can't. But we can see that the hadith is about the neighbor, but it's not limited to the neighbor. The neighbor is an example, and I'm not saying this exactly why, but what comes to my mind from my studying with my teachers, various different teachers, is neighbor is used because that's someone that you literally know is right next to you. It's like you're pretty much, I'd say, pretty much like your family particularly in those type of days. Back in the days, 1400 years ago, even 500 years ago, just how today you might know how your brothers and sisters, your cousins or your nephews and nieces, you know how they are, and if they need anything, then you will help them. Back in the day, your neighbor was like this, and many of the ulama, and particularly those upon the way of purifying their heart and upon tasawwuf and other things like that, they would often there would be needy neighbors that that they are struggling, but they are too shy to ask you for anything, and when they do ask you, they are like, I'm sorry to ask you. So this scholar and his family, they would ask this particular poor neighbor for salt. He did not need salt, and he was just asking because, look, it's not just you that needs things from me, I need something from you. And then the neighbor would feel at ease that it's not a one-way situation, it's two ways, and if he needs something, then he can take from me and I can take from him. And also another quick thing before I move on to the last section, a lot of people, particularly in places like Syria, the ulama, when they used to buy food, they used to buy it in dark bags, like maybe black bags or bags that you can't see through. So whatever meat, vegetables, fish, whatever you bought, and maybe your neighbor or whoever you're walking by doesn't have enough money to buy, they cannot see what you have bought, so you're not in a way showing off. You're not showing off anyway, but you're stopping other people from seeing what you have bought, and this is a way of being concerned about your community and whether we can help our neighbors, our local food banks, or whether they're in supermarkets, dedicated food banks, whether they're the churches or the synagogues or the Gurdwara, we should do so. And this is a way we can implement this hadith, of course, while still helping our neighbors where we can. And of course, that's done with wisdom. If you know your neighbor doesn't like X, Y, and Z, then there's no need to do X, Y, and Z. You tried your acting upon it, and if they prefer you to keep a distance, then you do so. Um, and now wrapping up, and then maybe final thoughts. Just two examples that I brought, and there's many more examples, but I thought I'd bring these two examples. And being in Leicester, this is the first example, and this happened just a few days before Ramadan, which is a very good thing because during Ramadan people struggle, and many people, the only food is because the local masjid does iftar. They have iftar there, and that's the only food, unfortunately. Um, the Highfield Street Food Bank, in line with Jamia Sufia on Highfield Street, they have opened their food bank just a few days ago, and it's open to everyone, not just Muslims, anybody. And they're open on Highfield Street. What days is it? On Saturdays. Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays. They are open. Jamia Sufia on Highfield Street. I believe it's 44 Highfield Street. I'm sure there's many other examples, but this is a recent example that I've come across. And you can see, and it's open to everyone. You don't have to be Muslim or Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or anything like that. And when I posted this, one comment that was you could say common is, oh, and maybe it was ignorant, and or maybe it was done on purpose to just mock or whatever. But regardless, I answered it like it was just someone genuinely asking. They were saying, oh, is this only for people who are non-white or only Muslims or things like that? So I said to them, you can see on the poster, it's open to everybody. And even in the video that I put, it says everybody, if you're struggling, come and we'll help you. And I've said it's for everybody. We're not told or only help these people, and only, of course, with things like maybe zakat and stuff like that, that's specifically for certain people. For general charity, you can help anybody, and this food bank is an example. And it's in our community in Leicester, and I'm sure there's other examples that I don't know about. And Highfields isn't too far from here, and we know generally maybe Highfields from, I don't know about now, but for a long time, often people are struggling in that community. And I'm not from that community, but I've been in that community, going to different mosques since I was young. And you can see things like this are positive. And before maybe 2010, when I was like 10, going there, certain things used to happen and it wasn't really pleasant. Maybe it's not completely gone away, but you can see it's positive. It's become more positive, and we've seen things like this, and other people, they have done initiatives like this where to help the community, and we've seen many people who are doing the wrong things, they have started doing the right things. And something like this not only is helping people who maybe need food, but it's helping maybe start conversations, because who knows, maybe someone who isn't Muslim is going to go to the food bank and they're going to think, oh, this person is a Muslim and they're giving me food, and why are they giving it? And why are they giving it often? Maybe because in the news they see X, Y, and Z, and in the streets they see X, Y, and Z, but why are they still going out of their way to help someone like me? And maybe they will ask questions, or they will ask their local mosque, or they will ask someone online or whatever else. And here is an example that, and this is not me making it up, you can see it on their Facebook and their Instagram, and you can even go there for yourselves. Anybody can go and you can get food. You can do, and if you can, then donate to them or anybody else, that they are doing good work for the community. And I keep saying the community. They didn't say it's the Muslim food bank for the Muslims. It's for the community, the Highfield Street Community Food Bank. And this is one example, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure there's many other examples in the UK and across the world where Muslims are helping the community. And another example, this is an international example, and it isn't necessarily a charity, but this is from a Karachi cafe in New Jersey in America, and you can see this on social media and articles online. They're feeding people, no questions asked. You go if you need food. Of course, people can say then anybody can go in, and they might not necessarily need it, but that's to do with them. But if you're hungry and you need food, turn up and no questions asked, and you're giving food. And this is an example in America, New Jersey, and I'm sure there's other examples that I didn't have time to go over, but I thought I would want to take at least one international example to show that this is not just in England or the UK or anybody or things like this. Is worldwide, that you can be struggling and we can help you. You don't have to be a Muslim. You don't have to be looking like us. You don't have to be anything like that. We're here to serve, and we'll try our best to help wherever we can. And these two examples, and I'm wrapping up now, um, show you that we are Muslims in Ramadan particularly, but outside of Ramadan, is like the food bank is open. Started just before Ramadan, but it's open after Ramadan as well. That we are told to help the community, and the community we know is not just Muslims, and we can see and we know that Muslims help non-Muslims, and any opinions, so-called pseudo facts that are not facts in fact, that say we only help our own people and we have our own community where we only help those within our own community and we do not help anybody else. This is wrong, and we can see it. And just as I finish off, I'd like to say Islam provides a framework to solve issues in our communities and bring people together. And Muslims are told to do help non-Muslims, not just Muslims. And this is what I'd summarize. And we are told to do so. And we are encouraged, we are rewarded. And in some cases, it is even further for us to do so, further being obligatory, depending on certain situations. And often we are told that give your charity to give your zakat and give your charity on Friday to the mosque, and that's it. That's your job done. And now we're seeing the reality is different. And just as there's a few minutes left, and I just thought of this, which I would feel is appropriate to finish off on, is the National Zakat Foundation, which I only came across maybe in October, September or October. They are doing an amazing job. This isn't necessarily me endorsing them or that this radio station is endorsing them. Just to give an example, I don't necessarily know exactly all of the things that they do, but they are specifically collecting and distributing zakat in the UK. Often zakat is given abroad for certain various different reasons, but we rarely see it in the UK. And now we know with the cost of living crisis and inflation and all of these other things, people are struggling in the UK as well. And maybe people are shy to ask for help, particularly if they're eligible for zakat, then they might be even more shy to show that you're in this situation. But National Zakat Foundation, they are doing an amazing work where they are distributing zakat to the local communities in the UK. And many of the ulama say that you can give zakat abroad and you've done your obligation and it's fine and there's nothing wrong with it, and we should still do that. But some of the opinion you should be giving to your local community also, because your local community is your community that you are supposed to be giving da'wah to, being good to, looking after where you can. So you're in your local community, you understand what's going on. Like I might understand that in Leicester there's XYZ issues, problems, or in the Leicester Muslim community there's X, Y, and Z problems, or the wider community. So I'm from Leicester, I've been here all my life, I know certain things, and I'm part of the community to a certain extent, and perhaps even now I'm speaking right now to you, then I relate to my community, I understand my community, and I have a duty to give back to my community who has given a lot to me, whether it's going to the school, colleges, and stuff like that, whether it's learning the Islamic sciences and other things. You should give back to your community. And we're seeing recently Qurbani, which will come up in the next Eid. People are starting to do it in the UK as well as abroad, and zakat should be done in the UK also. Not saying not to do it abroad, but in the UK we have seen many people are struggling, and maybe you can say they're earning more, but with the bills going up and so many other things going up, they can earn more than someone abroad, but then at the end of the day they might be left with the same amount as those struggling abroad, and maybe in some cases they're not even able to get benefits to top it up or stuff like this. So National Zakat Foundation is showing you, and of course zakat is specific, it has specific categories, but I've said before and I'm saying it again, we can give charity to non-Muslims, and we can replicate what the National Zakat Foundation is doing by doing a similar thing, but for charity that isn't zakat, so we are able to freely give it to anybody else. And we are seeing many people on the streets, homeless, many people that are working full time and they're still going to the food bank every week, and so many other things. And we are able to, if you are able to, then we should be able to help them. And I think there's a couple of minutes left. I'll say many of the problems that Muslims, and I finish off on this, that Muslims are facing, as well as non-Muslims, Islam has found a solution for Muslims. We're not here to force anything on anybody, but things like alcohol and gambling and drugs is forbidden. So we still see it in the Muslim community, but we don't see it as much maybe, or maybe it's not reported as much because they might be embarrassed. But because we're not supposed to have drugs and alcohol and gambling and whatever else, we don't see it. But we can even still see Muslims are helping, not just in the food banks, they're feeding the homeless. They even have workshops to deal with people who are having drugs, alcohol, gambling, or whatever else. In the Muslim community, there's still people that are doing so they are being supported. Even non-Muslims are being supported where we can. And many people that I've listened to, whether it's online or in person, they have said, some of them, that they have become Muslims for various different reasons, but what made them actually stop being an alcoholic or being a drug addict or spending tens of thousands on gambling and losing their house and stuff like this is because they become Muslim, and we are told we do not gamble, we do not drink and do drugs and whatever else. That was the thing that they needed to change their life. And this is not something that's often spoken about enough. Okay, maybe people who are struggling with gambling and alcohol and drugs, they don't want to be, and they're non-Muslims, they don't want to be told, they're struggling anyway, they're in a bad situation. They might not want to be told about Islam and Muslims in the struggle that they are in. So you can tell them, you can help them in ways that everybody helps. You don't have to say that you're Muslim, you don't have to say about Islam. You can use the techniques that you use and the things that you are told about. You can help them how you help the Muslims, and you'd see that they would benefit a lot from what we do, because what we do is tailored towards people that in a way that they should not be doing X, Y, and Z, but they have done it, so let's fix it. Whereas often from what stories I've heard personally, in person, it's because often, particularly in the UK, drugs and alcohol and gambling is part of the culture, maybe drugs to a certain less extent, but gambling and things like this is a part of the culture. People are doing it anyway, and they're doing it, and then they think, oh, just nothing, it doesn't matter, and then it gets out of control. But from our background, we know that we're not supposed to do it, so we can anchor it in a way where you've seen what the harm has happened to you, and we're here to help you, and we're here to show you our way in terms of how we deal with it, so we are not in a position to be a drug addict or a gambling addict or anything like that, and finding common ground and solutions that help everybody in a way that they feel respected and heard, regardless of whoever they are, I feel like is the way going forward, particularly in these challenging times when people like to say that we're enemies of each other. It's a time for us to come together and show that we're not enemies. We're here to help one another to do well in all aspects of society, side by side, getting along amicably as we have done for decades over here and around the world for centuries. And that's my closing message, that Muslims are here to help the community, I keep saying the community, not just the Muslims, to help the community as a whole and not just the Muslims themselves. Assalamu alaikum.